Microeconomics lesson 5. Now in this session we're actually looking at something completely new that hasn't been on the syllabus before, and this is the idea of behavioural economic theory. Right. In the past we've always had economic theory which is based upon man's self-interest and that man wants to maximise their utility. So if you believe in that theory, firstly you think that man is totally rational at all times, you think man can work out his own utility, and man also exhibits self-control. Right. What behavioural economic theory does, it looks at bounded rationality and bounded self-control. Now the first time I saw these terms I wondered, well, what does that really mean? What it actually means is this, is the individuals are only sort of partially rational and they cannot always exhibit self-control. We probably know in our own lives that sometimes we can get very excited and we are not always in control of our processes. Right. Supposedly, through cognitive theory, it takes a real effort to have a lot of self-control all of the time, and eventually your self-control can actually be worn out. So this is a new branch of economics and says that man is not always rational and cannot always exhibit self-control. So this is what we're trying to say right now. So standard economic theory ignores or rules out virtually all behaviour studied by cognitive and social psychologists. So standard economic theory has taken nothing from the field of psychology at all. It's just assumed that man is entirely rational, which has always seemed to me to be pretty fundamentally crazy. Yeah. Actually, just a thought in there, you know, now everybody's going to go crazy about behavioural economic theory, and I think it's got an enormous amount to add to economics, by the way. But there are also other types of economic theory which are also pretty relevant. So everyone looks at this one and then they don't look at what's coming next down the line. But we'll leave that for another day. Right, and what this says is we have unbounded rationality. Right, we assume that because man is very rational, that you have unbounded rationality, unbounded willpower, and unbounded selfishness. That means that individuals are totally selfish, totally rational, and have enormous amounts of willpower, and that is the old economic theory. So therefore man will always maximise their utility because those are the rules that govern economics. Okay, so first of all, right, it takes a lot of brain power to exercise self-control. Now you're probably looking at this going, what the hell is this individual talking about? But actually to exhibit self-control when you're constantly under attack is very, very difficult. Right. So say if you go out and you say, right, tonight I'm not going to drink very much, and there's loads of drink around the place, and then suddenly you've had a few drinks and you get involved in the party, and then you have loads and loads of drinks. Now that is exhibiting a lack of self-control, because spending the whole night exhibiting self-control will take up a lot of brain power and a lot of sort of emotion involved. So therefore you only have a certain amount in there. And I think this is quite interesting. If you actually take footballers, I can never understand, well, why can't you, in a World Cup, you only play 8 matches, if you win 8 matches you win the World Cup. Why are people so worn out by that experience? Because it takes up so much emotional energy. And it's like it drains all your emotional energy. So when you come back to play in the Premiership, you're worn out for a long period of time. You need to relax. Or take the example of when England won the World Cup in 2007. I think it was 2007 when Johnny Wilkinson dropped the goal, or was it 2003? I can't remember. Anyway, I think it was 2003, right? All those players came back and they were mentally shattered. They almost needed to take 6 months off rugby to recuperate again. Okay, so brain power. In fact, people are unselfish because a lot of people give to charity. 70% of people in America give to charity, and 55% of people volunteer their time for nothing. Okay, so this idea that we are totally rational and totally selfish is probably incorrect. So therefore we have a bounded amount of rationality, which means we are partially rational and we only partially exhibit self-control. Okay, and self-control use of energy, which I've already said. Now Leeson, he brought back a merchant bank. I'm trying to think of the name now. I can't quite picture the name from the top of my head. But after he brought down a 230 cent bank, and what they say is some financial dealers they are unable to exhibit self-control. They're like drug addicts. They become addicted to the buzz. They get high on it. So they want to make bigger and bigger deals all of the time. Now this is really what's happened in the credit crunch. It's loads of people so right, we're going to make loads of money, so let's go out every night and drink, and everything's great and everybody loves us, and let's just keep on working and drinking and drink some more and go out all the time, go out to parties, and then get into work and do more great big deals. Right? They became addicted to that process. And the people who do well in that environment, sort of, they lose an element of self-control. And so Fred Goodwin is an example of that. He just took bigger and bigger risks. He wanted to he had to create the biggest bank in the world, so therefore he was going to take any risk to go out and do that, even though he didn't really understand the process. But because he'd had a track record previously which has looked really, really good, therefore in a sense he sort of felt that he could behave like that. Okay, so road traders, like addicts and criminals, lack a certain capacity for self-control. So what they found out with road traders have the same mental balance as criminals. They lack the self-control. They have to break in because they can't resist the easy fact of an easy way of making money, even though there's obviously a high risk of being caught. And what they went on to discuss, I don't want to go too deep here, is that we always think that self-control is a cognitive process, that the more we exercise self-control, the more we'll be able to exhibit self-control in the future. What they found is, through various studies, it's a bit like a muscle, is that actually we always tend to react to events, and we only have a certain amount of self-control in us. Some people have less self-control than other people. Okay, some people have a lot of self-control, but some people have less self-control than other people. So therefore, once all of that is worn down out of you, you will exhibit less self-control. And therefore you will be less, you will less be able to resist things. So self-control takes energy and is a limited resource. So unbounded willpower, no, people lack self-control, okay? That they're totally rational, no, when they become dealers, they become irrational. Right, behavioural finance, and we can actually, the reason why behavioural finance has taken off is because we always think financial people belong to the efficient market hypothesis, and that people are incredibly efficient in this area. But the reason why it's taken off here is there's a lot of data from which we can find out whether or not people behave rationally in this particular area, because we can actually test. Now, what they found was there was these closed-end mutual funds. Now, a closed-end mutual fund is run by fund managers, but when they get rid of them at the end, they have to sell the stocks and shares on the open market. Right, now the net asset value of these mutual funds, when they're run by the fund managers, was always up here, but when they came to sell their stocks and shares on the open market, right, the value was always down here. So the fund managers always overestimated how well their funds were doing. But when they put them on the marketplace, suddenly the value of their shares held. Now this is an example of where the fund managers are not always rational. How come they always gave the wrong levels of net asset value for their funds? Bit of a shock to investors, okay? They think their fund is worth 10 million quid and actually it's only worth 8 million quid. Right. So that's one example of where it wasn't particularly successful. Another one was a study by DeBront and Thaler in 1985, and they looked at stocks and shares, and if shares were doing well for a few years prior to that, people would naturally assume, it's a natural reaction to assume, that they would continue to go up. Okay? And those shares that were doing badly would therefore continue to go down. So therefore you just looked at shares that were doing well in the last few years and you'd say, well, okay, they're doing well in the last few years, therefore they're going to continue to rise. And the shares that did badly, they continue to fall. In fact, what they often found is that some good news would lead to a far bigger increase in the share price than should actually have been allowed. So there was overconfidence in these shares. But what they found was, if you'd invested your money in the underperforming shares, you actually would have done far better than if you'd invested money in the shares that constantly did better. So once again, people were making irrational decisions on share prices. Another huge example of where people lack self-control is in terms of savings. For some reason, people do not save for the future. Okay, because it's a long way off, and you know, you're thinking, well, I'm now 20 and I've got to wait till 65. What's the point of starting to save at 20 for 45 years down the line? Okay, or even when you're 50, you think, crikey, I've got to save £15,000 a year every year for the next 15 years, and then I might have enough for my retirement. And what people tend to find, is economists have found, is that people's income was this, and when they're retired, it dropped massively. So therefore, people do not exhibit self-control in terms of having to save for their future. They tend to ignore it. So the behavioural theory says that people do not always exhibit self-control, are not inherently rational all of the time, and are not totally selfish. And therefore we should analyse economics in a slightly different way and put things in place that help us to sort out these particular issues.